love the cyberpunk genre, and I find it really inspiring from a musical standpoint to score with synthesizers and make music that has a really dark, electronic, and cinematic vibe. That's why today I wanted to take you into my sequencer so together we can explore what sounds I like to use to create something that's really inspired by a dystopian Blade Runner meets cyberpunk type of world. I've personally found that many composers, especially those fresh out of music school, they're typically a lot more focused on the orchestra and traditional scoring methods. So this is my way of trying to inspire musicians looking to break into this field to begin exploring and playing with these less traditional sounds and instruments, because when you're scoring for modern films and series every day as I do, synthesizers and music production techniques like the ones I'm going to show you in this video, I feel that they are equally important to the orchestra when producing music for modern content. If you're new here, make sure to check out modernmediacomposer.com and sign up for the mailing list to get my virtual instrument tension pads, which is absolutely free, and there's also tons of free composing tutorials that I'll email to you as well. If you're looking to take things a step further and level up more quickly, you can check out our pro course, Modern Scoring Mastery, which is now almost 10 hours of in-depth tutorials about writing and producing music for picture for professional films and TV. As we go along, if you have any questions or just like how the track is sounding, let me know in the comments section, and of course, stick around so that you can hear the full finished piece all together. Let's dive in. So to get started, I always like to sneak in with some sort of pad just to sort of like get the ball rolling. Sometimes I'll take it out after the fact, but you just have to get something down to start the creative process. In this case, I'm going to use some dark pads just to sort of enter us into the cue. So what I'm using here are actually some pads from Zebra and Omnisphere, two really great synthesizers that I use all the time. This pad from Omnisphere, the first one, it's called Oscar Bass 3, and I want to show you what it sounds like here. So it's just something to get us started here. I'm just adding a black hole reverb and decapitator, and I think that you'll find that when we're making this track, that's going to be very, very common. I like to add distortion and then reverb it out. It's going to just make things sound kind of gritty and dirty, and I think that that works really well in this sort of setting. The next pad I'm using here is Zebra Patch. This is actually a patch from Zebra 2, and this is what it sounds like. Again, it's just got this sort of analog-esque synthesizer tone. So I think that's going to work nicely. Let's keep adding to that now. All right, so here's a cool synth that I'm going to layer on top of those as well. This is from 8Dio's Phoenix library. It's a really great library for this sort of, again, cyberpunk, dystopian, atmospheric kind of sound. And what they allow you to do, which I think is really cool, is to stack different instruments together within the virtual instrument. So for example, if I were to click on one of these, I'm only going to get one synth sound. But if I were to click on the stack button, I can literally stack all the different types of synthesizers for that individual patch, and it gives you a much thicker and, again, more cinematic sound. So in this case, listen to how this synth sounds. Again, we're just sort of entering into the piece, and as you can hear, a big part of what I like to do with all of this stuff is I'm always writing the modulation. So that's going to give you sort of like the sound of a filter opening and closing, and it's really effective to sort of create dynamics with synthesizers the same way that you're going to create dynamics with a string part. So I want to continue by showing you what's on that patch, and again, you're going to see a pattern emerge here where it's Decapitator, which is by Sound Toys, and Black Hole by Eventide. These are just really cool plugins to add so that you can get this gritty tone. And what I'm going to add here next is a kind of cool flute sound that comes from a library called Engine. They've got these really sort of medieval fantasy textures, and what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to take one of those flute phrases and I'm just going to process it so that it sort of fits into this introduction for something that is completely the opposite of medieval fantasy, because that usually has a lot of really organic sounding instruments. Instead here we want to make this sound like it's a strange sound design synthesizer type of thing. So here's what the original flute was. So that's a cool sort of like flute phrase. I really liked it. And what I've done here is I have edited it and I have processed it a lot. As you can see, what I've done in the EQ is I'm just rolling off the high and the low end and boosting some of these high mids a little bit. And then I'm gonna add a bunch of effects. So in this case, I'm adding FabFilter's Timeless 2 plugin, which is a cool delay, and it has these really great like filters that go on, and it's gonna make it sound pretty awesome. Again, Decapitator and Black Hole, that's gonna be like my combo plugin for just about every track on here. But here's a really important thing to notice after those effects is I am compressing it with this Universal Audio LA2A plugin. And the reason I'm doing that is because what that's gonna do is it's gonna sort of squash the sound so that all of that reverb and all those delays, they kind of are gonna become more prominent when the main sound is more compressed, and those are feeding through the compressor as well. So after that, the only thing I have here is another delay, which is Echo Boy. Listen to what this ends up sounding like now from the original, and I think you'll hear that it's really a lot more interesting and definitely not as traditional. So I think that that's a lot more interesting, and when we blend that with the low pads, this is what it's all going to sound like together. So for me, that's really cool. It kind of just like brings us into the world we're trying to build musically here. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start sort of building this little motif, and I'm going to start with the filter really low so it's coming in from what you just heard, and it's going to start opening up as the piece builds. And I always like to do that. I find it to be a really helpful trick, especially if you're scoring a scene. If you're able to find a little motif or something that's just able to be repetitive, you're able to sort of create a longer piece of music that is evolving and emotional, and I'm really excited to show you how we sort of pull that off. So I want to show you this motif that I've done here. It's got a little bit of a Stranger Things vibe, a little bit inspired from that, but I think it's cool. Listen to how this sounds. And you can really hear the filter that's kind of like opening up, and that's what's going to make this piece of music sound smooth, going from that little introduction we just created to the main content that we're now starting to get into. And again, this is a synthesizer that is coming from that 8Dio Phoenix library, and we're treating it the same way. Decapitator, Valhalla. I'm using, in this case, a Waves API compressor to, again, sort of compress those plug-in frequencies that the Decapitator and the Reverb are giving us. Black Hole. And then what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start playing with this really cool plugin called the One Knob Pump, because I know where I want to take this, but we're not going to get into that just yet, but it's something to wait for. It's going to be really cool. So as that's all happening, this is going to open up and just keep repeating. But I don't feel that this synthesizer, I like how it sounds. It's got a very analog tone, but I want it to have a little bit more of a sharp definition. So I'm going to combine it with another synthesizer that I really love, and that synthesizer is called Spire. And I want you to listen to what that same repeating pattern sounds like with this. This is something called PL Go PB Cutoff. So this is just like a plucked pulse from Spire, and it sounds really cool. It's actually from, I believe, their EDM library, if I remember correctly. They have different patches you can get for the synth, and they're really, really creative and inspiring. So here's the Phoenix from 8Dio. This is what this sounds like. So I love that. I think it's really cool. And now here's what the Spire synthesizer sounds like. So that has a much sharper, much more bold attack, and I feel that that's just going to cut through and add more definition to this little part. Again, I like to combine things. I like to look for complementary sounds and just layer them together, and this is a good example of that. Here's what the two synthesizers are going to sound like together, and I want you just to listen for both of them separate, but hear how they make one sound. You can really kind of hear how the Phoenix pad, we actually kind of are getting a lot more of the top end from that. It's got that sort of like fuzziness to it, but then that really sharp lower attack is coming from the Spire synthesizer, and I think they work well together. So now we've got that happening. Let's just listen back to where we are. We're very much in the infancy of this piece of music, so stay with me, but you're going to hear how it really starts to bloom and grow into a really cool piece. So the next synthesizer I'm going to add is from Diva. It's a really, really cool synth from Yui, and basically this is a patch just called Flanderfield. I want you to listen to what this sounds like. I really like that. It actually kind of sounds like someone is bowing something metal. I have a number of samples in here of someone actually doing that, like bowing a metal lamp or bed frame or something like that. And it sounds like that, but it's got that sort of more analog tone. Again, I think you're going to see this on pretty much every single track that I do here. This is Decapitator going into Black Hole. So if I wasn't I have absolutely no endorsement from Sound Toys or even Tide, just for the record. Anyone who watches this channel knows that when you see these things, I just genuinely use them in my work as a film and TV composer. And so this is just my process, and I really love those plugins and use them, as you can see, very frequently. All right, so what are we gonna do next? I think that what we're missing once we get into this riff is a little bit more low end. So again, in true Jonas fashion, I'm going to continue layering things a little bit because I really like this sort of like motif that's been made. I'm just going to add that now into this awesome Omnisphere patch I use all the time. It's called Nitrous Bass, and it again has a really cool sort of analog synth tone. So here it is, and let's hear what this is going to sound like on its own. All right, cool. Let's combine that with the other two and hear them all together. Yeah, that has a much more sort of fat and cinematic sound to me. So that just goes to show you the importance of making sure that you're filling out the spectrum. If I took away that nitrous bass, listen to what happens. Gonna add it back in. Very cool. So it definitely is helpful to add that extra layer. And again, this is like a cyberpunk synthesizer piece. We're not really concerned about how sophisticated the music is. We're more focused on mood and tone and just creating a vibe. And I think that so far we're on to something here with all of that. You're probably gonna think I'm a little crazy, but I wonder what would happen if we just kept on adding layers to that synthesizer riff in different octaves to sort of create this sort of tooty choir of synths. It might be kind of cool. Yeah, see, like I think that that's a really nice additional layer from Analog Dreams, which is a Native Instruments library. Super great for this kind of sound. And again, I'm just reverberating that out. What I'm actually using is this wonderful little delay here from Valhalla, which is their frequency echo, and it's giving it this nice kind of shimmer. Listen to it with and without that. All we've done here is we've just created that sort of moody beginning, but we've added then following it the synthesizer motif, which we have just layered and layered in different octaves, and they're panned a little bit differently and they have little different effects. As you saw, that last synthesizer with that echo is going to kind of take care of that higher spectrum and really sort of add something. So let's play around with the volume and some filters and we'll hear how that sounds all together. you can hear now that by doing that, you can really sort of get like a lot of momentum going from just one repeating synth line. Let's now start sort of doing what I call moving around the cabin harmonically, which means in the bass, I'm gonna start sort of moving underneath that repeating line, and let's see how it sort of changes the emotional context of this piece that we're creating. So I'm gonna go over here, and I'm gonna add this bass part in the Phoenix bass. Let's just solo that out with one of these synths and just kind of listen to it first. Cool. So I definitely think that that's working, and I think that that's gonna sort of help us evolve and allow this motif to sort of shine as we are playing around in the bass like that. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add this really cool plugin here called One Knob Pump. And basically what that's gonna do, let me show you what this sounds like. So here's the bass on its own. Now if I turn the knob, it gives you that really sort of like EDM thing, and you can adjust just how large you want that sort of effect to be and how dramatic you want it to be. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start, as that part evolves, I'm gonna start turning this knob and blending in that little like EDM pulsing effect to the bass. I think it'll be cool. What I'm actually gonna do next is I'm gonna take that bass part and I'm gonna add it to this really cool patch here from Cinesamples, Cinebrass. This is the Monster Low Brass, and I use it a lot for everything. And I know that this is a synthetic, you know, a synthesizer piece. However, I think that this is just gonna blend in. You're not even gonna tell that it's brass necessarily, but the brassiness of this patch will work nicely. Listen to how this sounds on its own. So you can really hear, especially as it's getting into the brassier part where the modulation is moving up, it's gonna definitely cut through more. And I think that's gonna be really helpful and effective. And again, just notice how, since the whole piece is meant to be like this steady incline of intensity, we're kind of reflecting that in the MIDI here in the modulation. So let's add that. And then the other thing that I think is really effective for this sort of very cinematic sound are these low booms. These are again from 8Dio, who I personally find that a lot of 8Dio's libraries are just perfect for this sort of really cinematic, electronic, hybrid type of scoring. They actually have a collection called Hybrid Scoring Tools, and again, per usual, I have no endorsement from them. I don't even think they know about this channel, but the idea here is just to help you discover new sounds and textures that I personally use all the time on various films and series, and so these are definitely part of my regular sound palette. So these are effects hits from their Hybrid Drums library. Let's listen. Just like I did with the brass, I'm now going to put this into my low ensemble string patch. And I know it's supposed to be a synthesizer track, and it is. This is just going to help add that sort of cinematic vibe, but because these are all in sort of like the lower strings, lower register, it's just going to kind of fill out that bottom end, and it's not going to be really noticeable as a string instrument. It's just going to blend in with stuff. So I'm going to add that here. Listen to what it sounds like with the brass. I think it's kind of cool. Those chords kind of make me think of Godzilla marching through the city. I don't know why. But now let's break that out. I'm going to add those to my individual patches, which I always do. I might write something in an ensemble patch, but I always break it out for detail into my individual patches. Let's just listen to how this sounds now that we're bringing in all those moving bass notes here. Cool. I think right there is where I'm going to start bringing in what is actually going to be the synth theme for this piece of music. And again, just keep in mind, we are still in the early stages here. We're just going to continue building upon this. And it's how a lot of ideas sort of get formulated. You just try things, you layer things. I'll probably listen to it and say, oh, we've got too much here, we're going to take something out. It's just part of the creative process. So right now we're just throwing things up there and seeing what works. I do like this riff here that we're doing, and I think that the bass notes moving under it are very effective. So now let's put a top line on there to kind of like listen to how that brings things out. So I really love this synthesizer for doing these sort of like what I'll call lead synth parts. This comes from, again, Phoenix analog basses, but instead of playing it as a bass, I'm playing it as a lead. So just because something says basses doesn't mean you can't play in the top register, and it might sound really great. Listen to what this sounds like. Cool, I kind of like that. I think it's a nice melody. And again, I just want to point out that I'm using this analog bass patch from 8Dio's Phoenix library, but what I'm doing here is I am again stacking, and I'll just reiterate, since I know that I'm like driving it home, like I have no endorsement, I don't have an affiliation with them. So I want to hear how that lead part sounds with everything else. Let's hear what's clashing, what's working, what's not working, and just kind of adjust things from there. So if I rewind a little bit, let's go into this. Cool, so I definitely think it's coming together. Some things sound a little busy. We got to glue it, but I think we're on to something. I think we're on to the right track. I just want to point out here, as the basses start to move around and play different notes to, as I say, move around the cabin harmonically, what I do with this lowest synth is as you can see the volume here, I just want to point out that I duck it out because I don't want that low synth getting in the way of the bass frequencies as the notes are moving and clashing at all. So that's just really important to keep in mind. Always keep your bass really clean. You don't want like any dissonance or anything like that in the low register. So in order to start bringing in some percussion here, which I think is going to help glue things together, the first percussion piece I'm going to bring in is this kick from Battery. I happen to like Battery a lot for, again, anything that's sort of percussive and synthetic. And this is a really cool kit that I use all the time. I'm pretty sure this comes from what's called the Arena kit. This is what the kick sounds like. Doesn't actually sound like that out of the box. As you'll be able to see here, I am distorting it. I have the distortion all the way, the drive is all the way up to 10. So there's no need to worry about, am I turning the knobs too far? Is the needle hitting too hard? It doesn't matter. It's just about what you're going for. And what I want this to end up being is really gritty and dirty and aggressive. So watch the needle. So yeah, it's just slamming on there. I think it's great. I'm taking off some of the top end. I want you to listen to what this kick drum sounds like before I made those adjustments. Super small, not really interesting. You're getting this really sort of interesting thing happening after the effects are put on. Very cool. Here's what I call a gated pulse. This is going to be another heaviosity instrument. It's pretty cool, but what I've done, I want you to listen to what it sounds like on its own, and just like we did before, I'm then going to show you what I do to it to have it serve the purpose I need it to. So. So that's a cool, very definitely cyberpunk synth sound, but it doesn't go with the vibe that we're doing here. It's way too driving. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add this patch from Guitar Rig, which is just a gator. It's just a gate that's gonna open and close really quick. Tremolator could do this as well. I happen to like how this gator sounds from Guitar Rig. And of course, I am going to use a decapitator on it because everything in this piece of music has a decapitator on it. Let's check it out. I think that's going to be really effective. What other percussive elements can we add here to start gluing these synthesizers together so it doesn't sound like a big bowl of synthesizer soup, so to speak? Again, heaviosity instrument here, and I think you're going to find that to be a common theme, that for really sort of hybrid sounding tracks, or in this case, full-on synthetic tracks, my favorite instrument makers for that genre is really 8Dio and heaviosity, Yui, if I'm pronouncing that right, I hope I am, and, you know, other synthesizers like that. I think that these are cool. So here's some low sub hits from Gravity. Check it out. That's got a cool vibe. Yeah, I like that. So I'm going to sprinkle that in throughout the piece. And let's just go back and listen to where we are now. Sometimes it's really important to sort of step back, listen to what's going on, and that's going to influence your decisions moving forward. So definitely onto something. I think it's working. What I'm going to do is, you might have heard this really sort of distorted kick drum just hit for a moment on a sort of accent moment, and I'm going to just start sprinkling that in more. That comes from this cool library, DM307, again by Heaviosity. It's got a really cool sound. Check it out. So I think that's going to be really effective. If we use that sparingly on different downbeats, I think it's going to be really cool. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is, I'm hearing that synth sound. I want to thicken it up. I want things to be a little more cinematic. So just like I did with that synth bass that is, you know, moving around, I want to sort of like double the synth with some actual organic strings. And I think it's going to be helpful and not sound too natural because that synth is really powerful. And I think that these are just going to blend in super nicely and just make things more cinematic. You can't help that an orchestra sounds cinematic, but what we can do is we can sort of try, and the way we mix it and blend it together, make it so it's not as prominent and not what your ear attaches onto. So in this case, I am going to add that synthesizer part to the strings and the brass. Let's listen to what it sounds like with just the natural elements. Cool, I think that's going to be effective. And you can hear as well in the programming, like the idea here isn't like we're going for a really realistic orchestra. It's again just to blend in there, add some of that big energy, and you can really hear that when the violins take over what that synth line is doing in this high register. So one of the things that's going to help the orchestra sound that way and not be too traditional is that I'm not processing it like I would for a traditional piece. Again, I am adding decapitator to my strings, and then on top of that, I'm adding black hole, which I really don't do for the orchestra in a more traditional setting. So what you can see is that I'm processing these traditional instruments the same way that I process the synthesizers, and that's going to be part of what sort of glues it all together. You're not going to really be able to tell that there's strings and brass in this. It's going to all sort of sound like one focused synthetic instrument, I think. So we'll find out. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do, there's a patch here that I really love, and I can't help but try and see if it's going to be able to work its way into this piece. It's called Analog Strings from Output, and this is a patch called Fist Pumping, which is just a really, cool, aggressive title for that. Cool, so you can tell that that's got a really sort of modern synth sound, and it's blending with the theme. This other patch I really love is again from Zebra. This is called Purple Light, and it's very finicky. What do I mean by that? Well, you don't have to move the modulation very much for the filter to really react. But I think that this is going to be a cool addition, and what I love to do this patch, because it's so sensitive on the filter, is I add that one knob pump. This is a Waves plugin, if I didn't mention that before. And listen to how this is going to help. We're going to sort of add this sort of like pumping, pulsing sound. Do you see how I'm sort of riding that pump knob there? It becomes like really prominent, and then I pull it back, and at the same time the filter's being pulled back. These are just kind of sounds that I'm adding to fill things out and glue things together, and I think that they're going to work nicely. You never know until you play it back. This is all just sort of like a sandbox of fun, but let's just keep going with that. Let's actually hear how that sounds before we keep going. I have a feeling that this Purple Light thing is going to really sort of come to a crescendo right when the synth lead is hitting that high part, and I think it's going to sound really nice. Check it out. As you can hear that sort of one knob pump that's on a bunch of these things now, that's really helping that sort of soup of synthesizer sounds to just become part of the pulse and part of the moment, and I think it's really cool. I'm just going to add a couple wave files here now to, again, I'm at this point where I'm trying to glue the idea together. I can hear what I want it to be, but it's not quite there, and this is how I try and work through that. So, for example, what I've added here are some big hits, and these are sort of part of my production process. So, for example, here's what this hit sounds like. And then I'm combining that with what I call a fat whoosh. Then I'm combining that with this low hit. Super big. And then the last thing on there, the icing on the cake, are these taiko swells. Again, these come from 8Dio's Hybrid Tools library. I've just turned them into wave files so I can place them where I want. Super dramatic, really, really cool. And if you check this out, this is what they all sound like together. That's like a really big accent. It's definitely powerful. And what I'm trying to do is sort of just add some drama so that as that synthesizer theme sort of like reaches new heights, the music is following that intention. So let's keep going with that. What we can do is just add now on top of that another layer here. These are the cymbals. And those sound nice and synthy. Those again are coming from DM307, Cymbals, Rides, and Crashes patch. So I think that those are going to help us create this moment here where the synthesizer's hitting that sort of top line moment, and the strings and brass are supporting it, but they're processed in a way, as you saw, so that they're kind of part of this very synthetic arrangement. Let's listen to what this moment sounds like and see if it's really sort of like following what the intention of this track was. Alright, I think that's cool. Now I'm starting to get something where I actually feel it, you know, and that's what I was missing before. I'm like, oh, I like the motif. I think it's cool. Oh, I like the synth top line. I think it's cool. But it's now I can tell what we're building to, and it's really, really exciting. What I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to add, there's that motif that we've had running throughout it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of like highlight that at the very end so that it actually, the synth lead sort of tapers off, and then we sort of accent that motif line and make it part of the recognizable lead here. So for example, this is what the motif does. Right, and you heard that. It was one of the first things we added, and it's building. Now watch what we do. I'm going to add a ton of these nitro bass layers because you can actually really manipulate this sound to make it cool. Check this out. So that's echoing the lead, right? I'm adding that on top as another layer that's going to combine with the lead synth. But to get it to have that really nice synthy analog glidey sound, I just want to point this out. I'm selecting legato over here, solo, glide, and then this knob right here is going to tell you how much you want it to glide. So we're at 0.08 seconds. Listen to this part. That's creating that sort of nice slide between notes. Watch what happens if I raise it. Now you can hear it's more drastic. Let's go up even more. That's like taking way too long. So we're going to go back to where it was at, I think it was like 0.08 or something. It was really low here. So that's going to just sort of add a new flavor at the very end since the music is starting to peak. Here's the part I was talking about where we're going to really highlight that repeating motif at the end here. Check this out. That sounds like a really cool synth line. And what we're doing is it's the same patch from Omnisphere, but we're processing it pretty heavily, and we have that slide dialed up pretty nicely here. So here's the slide, right? And what we're doing to this track to make it sound so cool is we are adding Decapitator. What I've done here is I've added Little Alter Boy, and that's just a pitch shift tool, again from Sound Toys, and I'm cranking it all the way up an octave, but it's got this really cool drive feature so that you can add more distortion. And on top of that, what I'm doing is I'm blending it, so it's not like a fully up an octave thing. Now you're hearing the octave play with the original one, right? So on top of that then, I've got this one knob pump that you've seen me use throughout, and that's helping create that sort of in the club pumping pulsing vibe. So let me play you this without any of these effects or EQ. So that's like super dry. It's just not sounding like it's gonna glue properly. And that's why we add these reverbs and these effects, and then you get this. I think that's much better. So let's listen to how that all comes together for the very end of this piece. So that's really cool. And then to thicken it up, I'm just doing that. I just duplicated it and I'm doing the octave of it. You can hear the modulation sort of crescendoing for that really, really big ending. So I think this is getting pretty cool and interesting. Let's listen back to it and then just see if there's anything else we need to do to start tying it all together. try. It's definitely cool. I'm very happy with where we're going with it, but I just feel, and this is where it might be sometimes you're adding too much, but this is obviously getting really big and really epic. So I'm just gonna add one more thing. Again, it's gonna be something interesting because it's actually not a synthesizer. I'm going to add a choir. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna kind of like take the theme and the chords and stuff, I'm gonna place them in here, and I don't think you're gonna hear it necessarily again as you would in a traditional track. One of the things I love about using choirs and a lot of the samples is that they're recorded in a really big room or hall, and so you get a lot of really sort of like natural tones and reverb from them. And I think that when you blend it into a track like this, it has the effect where it just makes things more cinematic. And your ear might not attach on to like, oh, there's a choir in there, you know? It's not as defined as that, but it just makes things sound a lot more epic and a lot cooler. So let's just try this out. This choir is really my go-to for right now. This is Lacrimosa, if I'm saying that right. These are their sustains, and I just really love the way it sounds. It's got some great room tones, super epic, and I can't tell you how many really, really amazing and great projects I've been a part of where we don't use a live choir, we literally have used this. I mean, I'm talking like major summer blockbusters, and it's like, this is more than holding down the fort. So it's a great library, again, from 8DO. This is what it's doing. Cool. And if this was another type of piece of music, I would take more consideration, to be honest, where I would take the top line, put it in its own thing, program it differently, take some of the other lines and do individual programming, because you can hear that it needs a little, you know, TLC. But for the sake of this video and what we're creating here, I just wanted to blend in really the tone of it. And so I think we're going to be able to get away with that. Let's listen to it. Pretty cool. I could take it or leave it. I think that it adds something nice, especially if you sort of take the volume, taper it down in the beginning, and just crescendo up to the end. I think that's going to add some production quality. So I just want you, before we listen back, I just want to remind you where we started from. We just created a dark bed with some pads from Omnisphere and Zebra. We added this sort of flute sound that we distorted. We added some cool timeless reverb from Fab Filter. And then what we really did was we created this synth motif that we were just going to repeat and repeat. And we let the filter open up from that motif. And as it opened up, we brought in sort of the octave and different colors doing the same thing. The idea here is to take a, repeating pattern, just keep repeating it, and then as it repeats, underneath it, we brought in the bass notes that started moving around the cabin harmonically, and it really sort of allowed the piece to have a little more interesting flavors and become a little bit more emotional. And also, as those notes in the bass are moving, it allows us to sort of naturally build to the climax of it. And all along the way, we were keeping in mind production quality, making sure that the drums we were adding to it and the extra synthesizers, that they were, properly sitting in the world that we were trying to build musically. So I added a lot of decapitator, added a lot of black hole, added a lot of different things like the one knob pump. For this piece of music, I'd say that one knob pump is huge. So I just want you to sort of remember these things, because I know that this was a little bit of a longer video, but it takes time to sort of create music like this and sort of peel back the layers piece by piece for you. And so when you do that final review, I just want you to sort of like reflect on that, because it creates what I feel is a really sort of epic and fun, interesting sounding synth piece that fits into a cyberpunk dystopian atmosphere very, very well. And so before we press play, I just want to do a quick reminder. If you check out modernmediacomposer.com, we've got cool virtual instruments on there that are free. You can sign up for the mailing list to be notified when more videos like this come out. We also have our first premium course, Modern Scoring Mastery, which actually sort of demonstrates my process of scoring, but you're able to see the picture that we're scoring to. We actually score an entire short film, and there's a lot of cool stuff in there. So with that being said, let's enjoy this sort of epic, dystopian, cyberpunk synth piece. I think it's pretty good. You know, there's still things that I would probably tweak to it and everything, but that's just part of the composing process, is you got to step away, you come back, you either add or subtract, and you know, that's how ideas really sort of come together. I hope you've been able to take away some ideas to add to your own composition process. If you have absolutely any questions about the stuff we've gone over, just leave them in the comments section below. Also, if you have suggestions for future videos, I always love to hear about those. So again, leave them in the comments. Let me know. If you're not already subscribed, I hope that you will. It's an enormous help to the channel. I thank you for watching, and as always, I hope this was helpful.